Thank you, President Faust. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to provide just a brief overview of Hilt and then offer some framing for today's events. I wanted to give you a late-breaking update on the program. Joey Ito, unfortunately, is sick, so we will have fewer people in the second panel, and I think in some ways that's good because we're a little behind schedule, and we'll be able to take a little bit longer with the next panel that's coming up. First on Hilt. Hilt is an acronym that has a deliberate inversion of the usual teaching and learning phrase. Why? It's a quick story that I'd like to tell you to put that into some context. I'm going to tell the story and then I'm going to ask you to raise your hands in answer to a question afterwards. It's a story that some of you will have heard, but it bears retelling. About 150 years ago, steps from where we are now, a student approached the great natural historian Louis Agassiz, a professor that history has proved had some questionable ideological assumptions, but he was a remarkable scholar and teacher nonetheless. The student told Professor Agassiz that he wanted to become a natural historian and that he wanted to study insects. Agassiz handed him a fish. He asked the student to pull it out of the specimen jar, continually keep it moist, and without the aid of any tools or magnifying glass, to be ready to answer questions about what he could see, what he could observe. Several hours later, having put his fingers in its mouth, counted the scales, drawn part of it, Agassiz returned. He praised the student for the drawing, but said, "You haven't seen one of the most conspicuous features." Mortified, the student went back to it. A few hours later, he replied to Agassiz that he hadn't seen the conspicuous feature. He still couldn't see it. But he at least saw how much he hadn't seen before. This went on for days. Agassiz kept sending the student back to look at that same fish. At some point, he saw the conspicuous feature, symmetrical sides with paired organs, but he was told to keep looking at the fish. On day 4, he was asked to compare his fish to a second fish, and Agassiz said, "Facts are stupid unless brought into connection with some general law." 8 months of fish observation later, the student was finally allowed to study insects. He treasured this experience and became a prominent entomologist and paleontologist, but is probably known best today for having captured that story. Agassiz used the same teaching approach with many students he had, including, for example, William James. So here's the question. Would Agassiz's teaching method be effective with today's students? Raise your hand if you think no. Raise your hand if you think yes. There is no right answer, of course, because it depends on what you think teaching and learning is supposed to be about. What is the learning that is supposed to take place? Thus, learning first, teaching second in our acronym. Hilt, as a presidential, university-wide initiative, aims to, 1, build on the strengths of Harvard's long history in teaching and learning. 2, transform Harvard students' educational experiences in keeping with current and future technological and pedagogical needs. 3, extend Harvard's leadership in the research, application, and assessment of innovative pedagogy. And 4, develop a network of expertise, scholarly work, and creativity across and beyond our campus. Reaching those goals will take time and will require iteration. The model we've been working from to plan the activities of Hilt is very simple. Starting at the top of the cycle and thinking of the initiative in phases, we want to engage faculty, students, and the broader community. That's what this symposium is about. Moving to the next box, we want to foster experimentation, then support evaluation of what works, and then the most difficult and too often neglected part of the cycle. We want to provide the infrastructure to extend successes, to transfer scale, provide the conditions for successes to continue. Hilt can function to support, facilitate, build expertise and infrastructure, working in non-duplicative, mutually reinforcing ways with the many important similar efforts that are already underway across our campuses. This is not an original model. There are hundreds of similar conceptual models, easily found from a quick search, probably because it's related to a cycle of scholarship that we are all familiar with. And that goes hand in hand with our cycle. Ask questions, form and test hypotheses, understand findings in context, disseminate in teaching and in scholarship. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but I wanted to give you a little outline of what we've been working on in the past few months since the announcement of the Hauser gift. We've gotten so much done in large part to a very small staff and hard work. I want to thank publicly the all-competent, unflappable Brooke Pulitzer. And the literally hundreds of people who have volunteered their time and who have engaged with us and collaborated with us as we've tried to get things going. So, as many of you know, we solicited and received letters of intent from across the university for Hauser grants. We received many letters, 255. We found that they came from every Harvard school, from faculty, from students, from staff, and they're currently under review to determine which of these should be developed into full proposals. Sam Moulton, our Director of Educational Research and Assessment, here, has put together a related poster that you'll find just outside the door, and I hope you'll look at it, and I'd like to invite you to talk with him about what he has observed and about a few pilot studies that he's begun. As I mentioned before, we know that for innovation to go beyond the one-off successes, there also needs to be investment in the surround. So in the infrastructure, this includes, importantly, people, lots of people, those who can provide expert instructional technological support, and we're in the early stages of forming a teaching and learning consortium of those staff across the Harvard campuses. Another early investment in infrastructure, a collaboration and led by Anne Margulies. Where is Anne? There, our CIO and her academic technology team, is to work on Harvard's infrastructure for capturing, archiving, and using video for teaching and other purposes. And then there's today, the Symposium. There is a logic to today's program. We start with the science of learning. Some might argue that this title is a bit grand. There's a sense that the old teaching paradigm, traditional lecture from an authoritative expert, is gone, and that there is a new paradigm in the works, in part because of what we know about how the mind works. There has, of course, been much progress in the brain and cognitive sciences, but there's still much to be done to translate the rigorous experimental work of the lab into the applied, complex setting of the higher education classroom. Thomas Kuhn, who worked on the structure of scientific revolutions when he was here at Harvard, suggested that there cannot be significant enough progress to claim a paradigm shift until there's enough consensus about what the paradigm is. I don't think that we have that kind of consensus, but our panelists today represent the best thinking about how to take a scientific, evidence-based approach to learning. We see that approach as foundational for today's events and indeed for the initiative overall. Our second panel, Innovation in Higher Education, addresses the question, why now? What's different about today's students and today's culture? Are we at a critical juncture because of technological changes, because of the end of the textbook? Our panelists here, too, represent some of the most influential thinkers about these questions. And after lunch, we hope that you will embrace the role of student and in your assigned session, actively engage with some of our finest teachers. This is a bit of an experiment, and we know that it's not going to be a perfect experiment. We hope that you'll embrace that, too. Each concurrent session represents a mashup of disciplines and fields and perspectives from people who are known for their excellent or novel teaching methods, or who have provocative ideas about teaching that we think could cross disciplines. The size of the groups varies based upon the pedagogical techniques that are being demonstrated. We ask that you be good students and follow through with your assignments. They are on your name tag. So you will see an A, B, C, D on your name tag, and those represent the rooms of your concurrent session. We know that every one of these sessions will include amazing moments, and we hope that they also give you some ideas to use in your own teaching or to reflect upon your experiences as students. At the end of the day, before the cocktail hour, a fantastic final set of panelists will together with you attempt to tackle that most difficult question. What is it that we should be doing to ensure that the changes we invest in now will last and outlast individual charismatic innovators? While we expect all of the keynote panels to involve interactive Q&A, for this last session, after hearing from each panelist, Michael Sandel will help to facilitate a large group discussion. A wonderful colleague, in fact, one of our panelists, recently suggested to me that breakthrough innovations, as distinct from incremental innovations, often seem to be championed by people who are difficult, and that it might actually take sharp elbows to shift thinking. I hope that today's event will not result in any bruises. I do hope also that there will be substantive debate. A couple of logistics on that front. Our first two sessions are being streamed live. All sessions are being videotaped. During the Q&A, there will be a couple of roving microphones. You're going to need to raise your hand and have someone bring you a microphone so that you can be heard and so that you can be captured for posterity. There will also be, during breaks and lunch, interviewers who may ask you about your reactions to today's sessions. We hope that you will answer their questions, and we hope that you'll also meet people here today that you've never met before and take a look at the resource fair. As a transition to the day's first keynote, I'd like to read a quote from my intellectual great-grandfather, that is, my advisor's advisor's advisor. Jerry Bruner, a cognitive psychologist who later turned his attention to education. We need a surer sense of what to teach, to whom, and how to go about teaching it in such a way that it will make those taught more effective, less alienated, and better human beings. Our first panel will be facilitated by Mahzarin Banaji. She is the Richard Clark Cabot Professor of Social Ethics as well as head tutor in Harvard's Psychology Department. She studies implicit attitudes and biases and their impact using cognitive, affective, behavioral measures and neuroimaging. We are thrilled to learn that she has recently become interested in studying learning, and we are also incredibly pleased that she, like others here, went through scheduling gymnastics to be able to make it today. And with that, we'll start our first panel.